Let's start with the federal definition of equipment. Equipment includes tangible personal property. Let's break that down a bit. Tangible property means it has a physical presence, such as a jackhammer, unlike intangible property, for example, a copyright. Personal property doesn't mean for personal use. It just means that it is not real property, like a building and land. To meet the definition of equipment, the property must have a useful life of more than a year and an acquisition cost of more than $5,000 per unit. If the property has a value of more than $5,000 but doesn't have a useful life of at least a year, it would not be classified as equipment. If the grantee has an internal equipment policy that defines equipment as less than the $5,000 federal threshold, the grantee must use the same lower amount definition for equipment purchased for federal purposes. If your definition of equipment is consistent with the federal definition, you do not have this issue. Equipment purchased by federal awards is typically divided into two categories: special purpose equipment and general purpose equipment. Special purpose equipment includes equipment which is used for research, medical, scientific, and other similar technical activities. General purpose equipment is defined as equipment whose use is not limited to special purposes and includes items like copiers and vehicles. Special purpose equipment is generally allowable as a direct cost to the federal award. Normally, the organization must have the prior approval of the awarding agency to purchase equipment costing over $5,000. The regulations also state that general-purpose equipment should not be charged as a direct cost to the federal award without prior approval of the awarding agency. Next, the title to equipment can either vest with the federal government or the grantee as specified by the awarding agency. This is generally spelled out in the agency terms and conditions. When the equipment is titled with the federal government, the recipient still has responsibilities to manage and care for the federally owned property. One of these responsibilities is that the grantee must submit an annual listing of federally owned property, which includes the location and condition of the property. There are also special requirements for tracking and reporting on equipment. The requirements relate to both federally owned and recipient-owned equipment and include an annual equipment inventory listing, the requirement for an equipment physical inventory, and the types of detail that must be included in the equipment records. When the recipient has title to equipment purchased with federal funds, as opposed to equipment being considered federally owned, it is with the condition that the equipment will only be used by the program or project for which it was acquired. However, the federal agency retains the right to instruct the recipient to move equipment to a different project as long as the move won't interfere with the original project objectives. There are further restrictions on the use of equipment titled with the recipient. The recipient can't provide services to non-federal organizations using the equipment at a cost lower than a private company would offer similar services, unless the activity is specifically authorized by federal statute. Think of it this way: if the cost of equipment is borne by the federal government, the recipient could have an unfair advantage over a private company which has to purchase their own equipment. As recipients of federal awards, you must ensure that equipment is adequately protected from loss, damage, and theft. There are many ways to accomplish this, from secure access to storage areas to proper training of employees who use equipment in the field. Finally, when the equipment is no longer needed for the purpose that it was originally authorized for, the grantee should ask the awarding agency for disposition instructions.